Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on automation and QF72. I'm Jeffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Jeffrey.
Now, viewers, last week we had the great honour and privilege to talk with retired Top Gun pilot Kevin Sullivan, who joins us again. With his team of pilots and crew, averted the certain disaster in 2008, bringing the crippled QF72 in for a safe landing at Learmonth Air Force Base in Western Australia. Today, we are delighted to say Kevin's co-pilot, Peter Lipset, is joining us to make this a four-way conversation about automation. Good evening to you, Peter.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks.
Now, Peter is another Top Gun, let me assure you, currently back with the Royal Australian Navy in the Directorate of Navy Culture. Peter spent 18 years with the Royal Australian Navy as a helicopter pilot, endorsed on 5 helicopter types, plus the Mackie jet trainer. Then spent 25 years with Qantas, where he was a human factors instructor and endorsed on 6 types in command, including the 747 and the A380. Now, we've had a number of comments and questions on the role of automation in modern aircraft: autopilot, auto throttle, auto trim, auto protection, auto land, and basically auto everything. Today, we'll discuss automation and its role in the aircraft. But first, let's get more perspectives on what it was like on QF72. Peter, we're going to put you in the hot seat. You were in the cabin when the first upset occurred. Perhaps you can give us some colour around that. When your initial reaction?
Yeah, sure thing, Jeffrey. I was in the cabin. I'd only left the flight deck a couple of minutes prior to the first pitch down event. It was just that I was taking the third break of 3 breaks on the way to Perth, and there I was. Initial reaction was that I knew there was something very wrong. Because I had only been on the flight deck just a few moments or a few minutes prior, I knew that there was no weather around. I didn't feel like there was any, certainly forecast or any hint of clear air turbulence or anything like that. And there was such a violent pitch down that I knew there was something wrong with the aircraft. My thoughts initially were, well, hit the ceiling pretty hard and hit the floor pretty hard. And then it took a few minutes, actually a minute or two at least, to gather my thoughts and sort of, just figure out what was happening. There was people in the cabin screaming and crying, and there was a lot of broken things in the galley. There was ceiling panels hanging down, and there was just a bit of mayhem, I suppose, there, when all of a sudden I felt this precursory sort of burble that had happened, the little bit of up and down movement of the elevator, just enough to give that sort of rocking up and down feeling, and then bang, it happened a second time. So if I wasn't convinced that we were in trouble after the first pitch down, I knew that we were seriously in trouble after the second. And very shortly after that, we managed to retrieve the phone by pulling in on the string and getting in touch with the flight deck to get back up there. Because bear in mind, this happened in 2008, so well after the 9/11 events, where of course they made security doors for all the aircraft. So it wasn't a matter of just running up there. I needed to be in touch verbally with Kev and Ross, the second officer, before I could even get through the door. So we did all that, and I got back up on the flight deck, and went from there.
So what confronted you when you did get into the flight deck?
Well, it was pretty messy because everything that had not been tied down had hit the ceiling. And in those days, back in the dark ages, of course, instead of having an iPad with all the documents on it, it had ring binders which all hit the ceiling and exploded. So there's probably about 3,000 pages of, that size paper of company stuff all over the floor, which was pretty slippery. There was a passenger in there as well, a company passenger in the jump seat, as well as Kev and Ross in the 2 front seats. And Ross was trying to vacate my seat, and I was trying to get into that. We're kind of sliding around all over the place while there were stall warnings going off, and a lot of the ECAM sort of chime for a new message. Every time a message was announced, of course, there's a chime, or is it a triple click, Kev? I don't know, but there's noise anyway from that. So it was noisy and messy was my original thing. And I think I said to Kev, yeah, it's a bloody shambles out there. Because of course he had no idea what was happening on the flight. In the cabin, because he couldn't see it, whereas I'd had a bit of a peek.
Yeah. Swing back to automation with a question from Peter Butlerman, who wants to know what you both think of automation. Perhaps, Kevin, you can lead off. Your thoughts on automation?
I think we talked a little bit about it on the previous episode, and it depends on whether you're a pilot or you're an airline executive. Automation for a pilot is part of the crew now, and it better be a good crew member that is supportive, reduces workload, enhances the operation for the pilots, and that's what it's designed to do. For an airline executive, perhaps automation is a way to get a less experienced pilot into the right-hand seat. And what is happening is pilots are not there to fly anymore. We are there to monitor. And the automation takes care of everything when it's working, and it's quite easy. It's very low key, but when it's like that, you become complacent. And now we're waiting for the automation to wake us up and say, oh, I've got a problem. And that's through the flight warning. And it's been proven pilots have difficulty going from a monitoring role to an action role. And Peter, I know you know about this a lot from human factors, that to come back from sort of just monitoring the situation to now I must take action. You have to get back to the loop, and it's quite difficult. So my answer would be automation should be a good crew member, because that's what it's being pushed as, and even a replacement for a pilot. So it better be good.
Peter, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, what Kev says is 100% right, particularly about the complacency. It does a really good job nearly all the time. But the problem with that is that it can, by being complacent, you can sort of zone out a little bit, probably poor choice of words for someone in charge of an airline or in flight, but yeah, you do tend to sort of relax into that moment where everything's under control. But the problem is that the automation is what we call a brittle system, as in it doesn't give you warning of failure impending. It's either working 100% fine, it's on or off, and it goes from working really well to not working at all instantaneously very often. The problem with that is, as Kev alluded to, that is it takes a while to sort of gather your thoughts and go, oh, I better do something. And so I've always pushed for myself, and if anyone's ever asked me in the flight deck when we're having a chat, the idea of really being proactive about what's going on, because yes, everything's under control. You're not having to manipulate the controls at all to do anything. It's all happening all automatically. But in a second, you could be required to intervene. And if your thought process isn't up to speed or keeping up with the aircraft, it's going to be messy. Dare I say it out loud, Air France 447, they go, holy crap, and pull back on the stick. Wrong response. Because I venture to suggest, without no disrespect at all, I venture to suggest they weren't ahead of the aeroplane. They weren't thinking, if this, what would I do? If that, what would I do? They're not being proactive in that process, because the automation can lull you into that false sense of security. I hope that's okay to say, Kev.
Yeah.
Now Richard, you've got some thoughts on automation too.
Yeah, well, I'm a great believer that the captain and the first officer should be the final authority, and the computer systems are there as a service to the flight crew, and they should never have the final authority on any decision made on board an aircraft. And when you take that stance, then technology is wonderful, but it is a servant. It's not the master. And it has to be subservient to the trained and experienced flight crew.
Yeah. So on the back of those answers, Phil Bartlett, 7898, says, an amazing story related by your guest, that was Kevin, and something which really needs to be absorbed in real terms. It is often said that automation is becoming safer than using expensive and fallible humans, but it ain't necessarily so. Kevin, is the time coming where there will be no pilots in the cockpit?
Well, they've already tried to at least promote a study to remove one pilot in the cruise phase of flight, and that was between Airbus and the EASA in Europe. I think there was a huge outcry from every pilot on the planet, plus their unions, etc., to say this is not a good idea. So that study has been tabled for now, but again, it depends on what side of the fence you're on. Are you an executive in an airline to say, oh, well, that means I don't need 4 pilots in crews or on a crew, heavy crew. I can have 3 or even 2. And as Peter alluded to, we have reinforced flight deck doors. And a lot of the crew rest facilities and toilets are outside of the flight deck. So if something happens, like happened to us, and somebody's got to get back in there in the midst of everything else starting to fail, it took us 7 minutes to get Peter into the flight deck from the first pitch down to the actual time. Our workload was so enormous, and that's with 2 pilots, to work a space to allow Peter entry into the flight deck. So the answer is probably not certainly not in my lifetime. Even with 1 pilot being taken out, I would like to say maybe not in my lifetime, but who knows?
So Greg Provost, 3183, asks a great question. Maybe we should be looking at letting pilots fly airplanes and let computers just look over their shoulders, backseat flying. Airbus's A350 Dragonfly project is a case in point. It appears that airline CEOs are very enthusiastic supporters of Dragonfly and primarily see it as a way to lower their overheads, pilot salaries. Now, Richard, you've done some data on the Airbus A350 Dragonfly project. Perhaps you can give us a bit of a brief on that.
Sure. The Dragonfly program is a demonstrator led by Airbus Up Next, a subsidiary of Airbus Group. And it's aimed at exploring the advanced pilot assistance and autonomous flight technologies on board a passenger jet platform. The test aircraft is the A350-1000, and that's used only as a demonstrator, and it's configured with the relevant sensors, software, and test equipment. We're showing a screenshot of the Airbus Dragonfly project. According to Airbus, the project draws inspiration from the biomimetic concept of a dragonfly, its vision and maneuvering capabilities. That's why they chose the name. The primary goals are to develop and test systems for automatic assisted landing, taxiing, emergency diversion from the crews in the case of a crew incapacitation scenario, and to assess computer vision and sensor-based algorithms that allow aircraft to see, in inverted commas, understand its surroundings, identify landmarks and terrain and obstacles, and make decisions accordingly. So it's autonomy or a high assistance mode. And to evaluate how these systems might interact with airline and air traffic control operations and how they might enhance safety and operational efficiency. And it is goal to explore the feasibility of reduced crew workload, contingency automation when a pilot is incapacitated, and without requiring a full pilot removal from the cockpit. And Dragonfly raises the question of how much automation is acceptable and how pilot is made. And an authority in an emergency. Now, Boeing has what is we call the WISC program, fully autonomous flight, and will definitely influence the future now that WISC's CEO is the head of Boeing commercial airplane product development. So, Kevin, coming back to you, how much automation is acceptable, do you think?
I would say, first of all, that, and I fall back on my comment, if it's a positive crew member, then, and it's not going to cause any further confusion if it fails, then probably we're pushing the limits right now with even on the A330 of how much is too much. And when it fails, what do you fall back on? What does the pilot fall back on? If the pilot does not have extensive manual manipulation and situational awareness, they're in a monitoring role, then that dependency starts to get a little bit shady, because it's fine when it's working, but when it ain't working, then what do you fall back on? So I know that the A350 is even more automated, especially with their monitoring of air data, etc. And as long as there's automation there, and the manufacturers say, this is how it's going to fail, just like an engine, this is how it will fail in the simulator, then, okay, the pilots are prepared. But if you're saying, well, that's never going to fail because it's automated, and the people that designed it are superior beings from Alpha Centauri or something, then better than us, then we don't have to worry about that. But I say that you do. And I've been quite outspoken ever since our event, our accident flight, that pilots need to be trained in this, just like we train for engine failures or dual engine failures or loss of braking, etc. And the simulator is what it's there for, but it's certainly not in my time in the airline. I never saw any training like that. We're there to save the day. We're pilots. We're not magicians. So to expect the pilot to work it out, and they've never seen it before, is, I think, extravagant. But if the pilot fails, it's easy to blame the pilot. Oh, they didn't figure it out, so that's what happened. So it's very convenient to use that as the pilot as a scapegoat if the automation fails and they can't handle it.
From Richard McQueskey, 1949. Thank you for inviting Mr. Sullivan to speak to us about his challenging ordeal. I hope that his flying experience can be fully utilised as an instructor to other pilots and also as a consultant to the software developers who are producing these flight automation systems. This two-pronged approach would greatly help to improve the safety of electronic fly-by-wire aircraft for the crew and passengers. It is interesting, though, that Airbus did not take the same approach for its flight control computers as the NASA Space Shuttle program did, whereby multiple redundant units automatically will disable a non-cooperative unit with discrepancies in its control data and therefore in its decision-making capabilities. Now, Peter, your thoughts on the pilot being able to take control and override, particularly given your Masters of Aviation Human Factors degree with Swinburne University of Technology?
Yeah, look, I think it's absolutely essential, Jeffrey, that the captain or the pilot flying is able to take charge and instantaneously. My personal feeling is I've always preferred Boeing aircraft. Is a bold statement to make publicly, for that reason, because in terms of automation, it's only one click away from complete control of the aircraft. But, and there's a big but, it presupposes that the pilot flying is capable and in current practice and up to speed with manual manipulation of the aircraft control and manual flight. And my fear, we talk about A350 just a moment ago. These aircraft are flying longer and longer, bypassing airports that we would normally stop and land at. Why is that important? Well, give everyone a go at doing a descent and approach and landing into that place, and then a departure out of it. So as soon as you add legs to those aircraft like the A350, an unintended consequence is that you share less takeoffs and landings amongst the captain and the first officer. You're already not getting a truckload of them per annum anyway. And at the same time, there's a sort of push towards having pilots more as monitors and, equipment managers and software managers and program managers rather than actual pure flying. And I just think it's fraught with danger, because we'll end up with pilots in less current practice faced with even more complicated emergencies, because the automation can add a layer of complexity to the whole problem that wasn't anticipated. And I think it's a bit like, little analogy for you, a bit like, if you played the piano, if you don't practice as much as you used to, when you were a young stud flying your F-14 or whatever you were doing, you're doing lots of takeoffs and lots of landings and screaming around the sky. If you're only doing 3 landings a month, for example, not that that's, be all and end all doing the landings, you're necessarily getting less practiced at it as you age, because on top of that whole scenario, there's a push to have older pilots staying longer in their careers, and you put it all together, and it's just chipping away slowly at that notion that the pilot is in charge and will be up to speed when he or she takes charge. I think we're subtly undermining it very often in just little ways that may well come back and bite us on the bum. Just let me say it out loud.
Absolutely.
And also, Peter, and it's the same. Each airline has its own automation policy, and it varies a lot, to the point where you take off, gear up, autopilot in, and then 10 hours later, 100 above the minima, disconnect, land. And where is the erosion? The erosion of your piloting skills and hand flying skills is based on that automation policy.
100% right, Kev, 100% right. And the debrief for any observer would say well managed very often, not well flown, but well managed. Yeah. And they're right, it is well managed, and it used every available asset and every available tool at your disposal in terms of the automation to make it a smooth and accurate flight, and that's all awesome, except that you haven't practiced your primary job, which is flight path control manually, because you've used everything. And we don't, I think, in airline world, take those opportunities as often as we should. I'll speak for myself only here. The automation is there, and you're busy doing stuff and busy airports and all the rest of it. There's all the reasons in the world why you would use the automation to best advantage. But, pardon me, if you're not careful, if you don't purposefully disconnect all that and have a fly every second or third sector, then you can go months and months with the only manipulation will be, a couple of 100 feet to touchdown and the flare and roll out. What? Next thing, it all turns off at flight level or whatever, and it's like, what are you going to do now? Let me think for a second.
Now, my co-host Richard Godfrey has worked with Airbus, Boeing and NASA, and before we get him to talk about that, I want to give a small plug for Kevin's book, No Man's Land. If you haven't downloaded it, there's a link below, and I can tell you it's a gripping story and well worth the read. And also, viewers, please subscribe to us, please like us, please keep those wonderful comments and questions coming as well. Now, as I said, my co-host Richard Godfrey has worked at Airbus, Boeing and on the NASA Space Shuttle. And so, Richard, what are the different approaches to flight control computers from those 3 organisations?
They're quite starkly different, but they seem to be merging. Fly-by-wire came in partially on Concorde, the first commercial aircraft. On military aircraft, it goes back much further. And the Airbus A320 was the first fully fly-by-wire aircraft in 1988. And the 777 from Boeing was their first in 1995. I mean, fully fly-by-wire. So the A320 was first generation, and the control laws were relatively simple by later standards. The A330 was second generation and more refined and normal, alternate, and direct laws. And the A340 was basically A330 architecture, but quad engine logic. And the A350 is the third generation fly-by-wire and gets much more complicated and is getting ready for autonomous flight with computer vision and automated taxi and obstacle detection, as we talked about in the Dragonfly program. And Boeing control laws are soft protections, which a pilot can override. And Airbus control laws are hard flight envelope protections, except when Airbus is in direct law, then the pilot has full authority and no protections. And on the shuttle from NASA, there were 5 IBM AP101 computers derived from the old IBM 360 architecture. And 4 of those ran the primary avionics system, the PAS. And the 5th computer was a backup flight system. And if 3 out of the 4 primary disagreed, well, they could switch off the 4th and shut it down. And the primary avionics system was a real-time flight-critical software. It covered ascent, on orbit, re-entry, guidance, navigation, everything. And it had an auto-land capability as well, but that was actually never used operationally on the shuttle. And you can imagine it's quite complicated. There were actually 400,000 lines of software code written largely in a language called HAL-S, developed for the IBM real-time avionics tools. And HAL-S is a high-order assembly language for the shuttle. And of course, the HAL comes from certain science fiction. But the NASA Space Shuttle Flight Critical software was developed back in the 1970s. And we've come a long way since the 70s. And it was developed by IBM, but the backup system was developed by Rockwell International. And it was very interesting, when we were working on the IBM system, we were not even allowed to talk to the Rockwell team working on the backup system. They wanted to make very sure that there wasn't any common failure by introducing common thinking in the development programs. And there's a company called, which is, sorry, I've lost the plot here. Okay, I'm back with,
Yep.
Yeah. A company called Whisk, which is not just into vertical takeoff and landing systems. Whisk is now being adopted by Boeing as the fully autonomous flight program, so end-to-end autonomous avionics and no pilot on board. And there is a huge philosophical gap between Boeing and Airbus, and that's quite real. But now it seems that both companies are converging over time and both pushing to more and more automation, tighter integration, and more computer-mediated flight control. So we'll see what Dragonfly program does on the Airbus side, and we'll be seeing what Whisk is influencing on the Boeing side. And at the moment, Whisk is in for full autonomy, and Airbus is in for assisted autonomy. And actually, both full and assisted autonomy make me nervous.
Well, I think they make us all nervous, Richard, and I think we mentioned it last time when we were discussing it with Kevin, and I believe that the circuit breaker here is going to be the passenger, because I just do not believe a passenger is going to get on board a fully autonomous aeroplane. I mean, there's one thing to talk about those 4-passenger flight taxis that fly 50 kilometres. It's something entirely different to talk about an aeroplane that's going to fly over the North Pole. I know what do you think, Peter?
Yeah, 100% right, Jeffrey. I mean, I wouldn't get on it in a pink fit. No one would. One of the most common in-flight emergencies we have, which I've experienced a couple of times, is incapacitation of the other pilot. And if you're down to 1 or indeed 0, it's just fraught with danger. It's just stupid. The trouble is with this, of course, is that in airline world, the biggest costs are both fuel and personnel costs. So you can't really do that much against fuel, although there is hedging. But if you want to save money, get rid of one of the pilots. It's a simple solution with far-reaching consequences, or get rid of both of the pilots. And what I think is not actually often acknowledged is, well, a lot of the time, potential disasters they're never even brought to light because it's the classic dynamic non-event. It looks like it's all safe, and it is, because there's this dynamic team working up the front, going around the weather, noticing that the oil pressure's gone a bit low, talking to maintenance watch, coming up with a plan and getting the job done. But I have no faith that automation can take care of that, because when it breaks, it's broken completely. Whereas pilots see through all of those things, take it all in, and very often, as Kev said, save the day. We don't earn our money when everything's working. We earn our money when things start to break, when things start to go wrong, and that's when you need them up there.
Yeah. I've got a question from Astef Calix 4126. Dear Richard and Jeffrey, this episode represents a perfect storm for those inclined to discredit honest work and logical reasoning. I consider myself an attendee at a seminar in which we are all participating, not only in the investigation of a major aircraft accident, but also in the presence of a guest who is both a combat-proven and Sully-like stick-and-rudder pilot. That's you, Kevin. Finally, the computers did not stack the deck. Man pulled alongside the machine, and this time the pilot managed to be the ultimate safeguard, but the chances of failures on automation will never be zero. Kevin, this time the pilot managed to be the ultimate safeguard, correct?
That's why we're there. We're there to save the day. And we did. In a science fiction scenario, that was never supposed to happen. We were able to maintain control of the plane and work through a problem to get it, all the problems we had, to get it safely on the ground at Learmonth. And just look at, my experience, but look at Peter's experience. He's flying helicopters over a dark ocean onto the back of a small destroyer or frigate. That is hard work. And it's an extreme operation, just like flying around an aircraft carrier is. Anytime you're over the Black Ocean, you better have a good instrument scan. You better have good discipline. You better be aware that everybody's trying to kill you that's around you. And that is just another level of experience and preparation. And that's what we had. And that was essential.
It's extraordinary that on that aeroplane, you had yourself and you had Peter, two of the most experienced military pilots in totally different disciplines. That was it was the perfect combination to handle an extraordinary event. Would you not agree, Peter? And don't be modest.
No, look, I think we were both lucky to have each other, and Kev was obviously more than capable of flying it, and prove that. But I knew what my role in that was as well, and I think we both played our roles well. I'm trying to relieve Kev of every other duty except overarching decisions and flying the aircraft. So talking to the company and to air traffic and to the cabin and running checklists and keeping an eye on, making sure it's all stays on the rails. That's me, but it's not because of any other reason that I'm trying to free up Kev, give him the headspace, give him the freedom to just fly the damn aeroplane. Just all he has to do is worry about that, relieve him of all those other duties. So, yeah, we both played our roles okay, I think.
And let's not discount our third crew member, Ross, who he was 6 months on the airplane when this happened. He did some amazing actions on his own innovation and own motivation. During the first pitch down, he reached up. As we're pitching down, he hit the seatbelt sign on. When we stabilized, he made the emergency PA for seatbelts for everyone as we're climbing up. Once we got Peter back in the seat, he started cleaning up all those charts that were littered in the back of the flight deck. He got the interaction with the cabin to find out the nature and extent of the injuries. As we were descending into Learmonth eventually, he activated the pilot-assisted lighting so that I would have a PAPI system that's in place there. And then we noticed that our ears were popping and the auto controller for the pressurization was also failed, which we didn't know until we actually experienced that. So he said, yeah, I'll manage that. So he was manually controlling the pressurization through the outflow valve until we got on the ground. So, I'm still amazed of the workload we had, how we managed it, because we'd separate and we'd come back together. And that's the only way we could have done it with the amount of carrots that had popped out from down on the overhead panel that we had to manage. I think it's just amazing performance by the three of us to work together and stay in the loop and keep everybody in the loop and get the plane on the ground.
Absolutely, the A-team. And there's a couple of comments here, if I can read them from our viewers. Verdi 6043, psychotic automation, what a threat. Jeff Daniel 814 says, wow, just wow, what an interesting episode. The conclusions drawn at the end fully align with my views on automation. The law of diminishing returns is clearly at play. I agree with Jeffrey. I will not fly in a complex commercial plane with a single pilot or no pilot at all. And Captain Al Francis, anyone who has ever experienced a computer glitch and said, why is it doing that, can understand why. As a long-time captain, am very uncomfortable flying as an aircraft passenger on an Airbus aircraft. Frankly, I don't like fly-by-wire concept either. Obviously a Boeing person. That system was developed for fighter aircraft to prevent, among other things, pilots pulling too many Gs and blacking out. However, fighters also have an ejection seat to escape an aircraft that's gone haywire. Captain Sullivan is to be commended for his consummate skill and ability to remain cool under extreme pressure. I absolutely agree with Richard that no aircraft automation should ever be able to override the inputs of the pilot in command, but that's exactly what is the case with Airbus industry aircraft to this day. Peter, your thoughts on that comment?
Agree 100%. As I said earlier on, only personal preference. But yeah, I like the Boeing concept of you can ditch all the automation with the click of a button and you're in charge now. And I'd much rather that than the so-called hard limits that the Boeing flight envelope protection imposes on you. Because, again, great when it's working. When it goes wrong spectacularly, as we've seen. And it's very hard to sort out.
Kevin, some more thoughts from you, perhaps?
Well, exactly what Peter said and Richard has both said. We both said these hard protection modes cannot be overridden. So if we can see, I knew what was happening. I knew they were false, but I could not disable that because it's part of the design. It's a hard system. And if it says I'm going to protect myself, then you become a passenger as the pilot in command. And who wants to be in an airplane where the captain is a passenger as well? And that's exactly what I was for those 2 pitch downs. And then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, here's what's left. Do something with it. And all we had to concentrate on what was working and keep in mind what was not working for our approach and landing.
Yeah.
Can I butt in for a moment?
Yes, Peter.
Sorry to get out of sync there with you, Jeffrey. Yeah, to illustrate how messed up that was too in terms of control, after we'd parked the aircraft, I don't know if Kev made this point when he spoke to you previously, but the aircraft computer system, the automation, the system was so messed up that we were still getting stall warnings after the aircraft was on the ground, sitting on its wheels, of course, with the engine shut down. It's still going stall. It's like, dude. So this is the point that Kev was making. We can see that that's not the case. We can't, physically can't be stalling. We're not even in the air, for crying out loud. But the aeroplane thought we were. So to give a computer system autonomy over my decision-making when it can get to the stage where on the ground it thinks that it's stalling still, no, not a fan. Sorry.
No. Richard, you got any thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, I fully agree with both our guests, and there needs to be the ability to reach forward and press a switch to disable the automation, and that should then be instant. And when you make that decision to disable the automation, you go into direct law and direct control of the aircraft. Now, the aircraft may well be crippled, but you understand what is crippled and what is not crippled and what's still working. And then you're in exactly the right situation to directly control. And I think it's amazing, as I said in the last episode, that Kevin worked out in real time this sort of flight test program to bring the aircraft down to 10,000 feet and try out exactly what was working and what was not working. And as a dress rehearsal prior to landing, with a full knowledge of the limits that he had to work within. And having to do that in real time is absolutely incredible. And you saved the aircraft, gentlemen.
And Richard, I have something to fall back on. I've got a full toolkit of experience, as does Peter. And so we have that awareness, and it's not anything that we learned in our airline flying. This was from a previous life that now is being utilized, and it shouldn't be, but it had to be. And like I said, everything I did, I learned somewhere else, not in my airline, to deal with this extreme failures.
And that can't happen with artificial intelligence. You can't pack all of that experience into an artificial intelligence system. So I think we're still a long, long way away from automation taking over.
Yep.
Indeed, Richard. And also you can't pack that in to the concept of the low-hour pilot with a multi-crew pilot's license sitting in the right-hand seat. Again, another concept by airline management, I should say, that seems like a good idea for saving money, putting low-hour pilots into the front seat of airliners with an experienced captain. But again, I've seen people completely incapacitated in flight, literally pulling people out of the control seats with a couple of cabin crew and vomit and the whole thing happening while that's underway, completely incapacitated. Okay, now you lower our pilots halfway across the Pacific. What's the plan?
Yep.
Terrible.
And of course, let's just digress to the conventional airplane, as Airbus calls it, a 767 or a 747, that doesn't have these protections or flight control computers at all. But we are the flight control computers that are managing to keep the airplane in its safe operating envelope. And I'm quite comfortable to do that. And do I need to have a computer that's going to do it? And then if I touch a boundary, it's going to put me in a worse situation than when I was before. I'm not a fan. So.
Now, Peter, let's get back to QF72, and perhaps you can talk about the situation on the ground at Lont Airport. Apart from the stall warnings that your plane was still giving you, you still had other challenges as well.
Yeah, we sure did, Jeffrey. And it's an interesting thing, because most times when there's an in-flight emergency, you'll land at an airport of some sort where you've got an aero bridge very often, and you've got a whole bunch of potentially ambulances, and even if it's not your, a company online airport, you'd have a whole bunch of people champing at the bit to assist you. And we certainly got some great assistance from the people at Lont, the police and ambulance, and the CWA ladies making sandwiches later in the day, of course, as well, which was great, amazing. But at the first instance, you open the door and there's nothing there. So what do we do with that? Well, both Kev and I think we think the same, being ex-military. Until you're relieved, you're on duty. And of course, it doesn't matter who was the pilot in charge in Qantas, pilot in command in Qantas, they would stay engaged and part of the solution to the problem on the ground. But yeah, what do you do with people? You get 315 people, but the terminal building's only designed to take about 80. It's a hot day, there's no water, there's no one on the ground to help you, there's people going out in stretchers. It's a problem, and we needed to work through all of those things piece by piece until we did get assistance. Later on, there was company people came up in a jet from Perth, sort of an emergency team, I suppose, and there was ambulances and a local hospital. I'm reliably informed is a 8-bed hospital. We had 15 people with serious injuries. There was air ambulance aircraft coming in that were already airborne when we declared a mayday, who were changing their in-flight details to go to Lont, knowing that we'd need help. So it was a bit of a evolving kind of scenario, but Kev and everybody, all the cabin crew as well, who I take my hats off to, were all engaged in the process of solving all those problems one by one, getting people off the aeroplane and all those things, and did a great job. And can I just add also that, deep respect for our cabin crew. Some of those ladies and gentlemen were injured quite significantly and battled on for the rest of the day, doing the best they could with their passengers. And in any other arrival port that we'd go to, they would have been relieved of their duties as soon as the door opened, but they stayed with it. We didn't get out of there till, what time, Kev? Was after midnight.
Yeah, we were on the ground for about 10 hours.
Yeah.
Before we actually sat in the plane, and then we were in the last airplane to leave, and the captain was having difficulty with the load sheet of where people were sitting, etc. And he just said, I'm not going to take off until I've got that. I'm certain I know where everybody is and the loading is correct. I said, good, take your time. I said, we don't want to be rushing anything at this stage of the game. But he'd been turned around. He was on overtime, a 12-hour tour of duty plus. So eventually we got airborne. But going back to what happened once we landed, of course, Peter prints out War and Peace, and we're looking at it, and we're just like jaws on the floor. As I talked about last time, Ross and I went through the sequence of events, and I put some notes on this War and Peace. And Peter said, I'm going to go check the cabin. I said, okay. And he was gone for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes as Ross and I were going through the sequence of events. And when he came back in, he was visibly ashen of what he had seen. And I just looked at him. I said, "Is it that bad?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, it's bad." So I eventually did the same thing. I call it the walk that changed my life, because even though I was not responsible for the injuries, I was responsible to look after those people that were injured and traumatized, etc. So the boulders of responsibility started dropping very quickly onto my shoulders, onto the pilot's shoulders, onto the cabin crew shoulders, because there was no assistance for a long time. But then in one of the sat phone calls to the company, I said, "Hey, we've got some live dogs in the cargo hold. What are you going to do about that?" Oh, okay. And fortunately, a couple hours later, and we're out on the tarmac outside the airplane, and there are the two cages with the two dogs there. And Ross and Peter were next to me. And I said, "Oh, the dogs are out." I said, "Who let the dogs out?" Ooh, 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 ooh. And Peter's just looking at me, and Ross is looking at me like, I said, "What? It's the perfect song for this." And anyway, just trying to break the tension and break the stress that we were under. And then, well, even before then, when we landed, and I talked about that before, that your body, once you feel you're safe, you're flooded with all these other chemicals that say you're safe, dopamine, all these things, and you just sort of click off. And as we're rolling down the runway, and I'm looking at where I have to park, because I'd never been there before, and I looked at Peter and I said, in my best Arnie Schwarzenegger voice, "Well, there's a bit of excitement and otherwise dull day." And that's from True Lies, in case nobody knows. It's how old I am. But Peter's looking at me, and I looked at Ross, and Ross is looking at me, and they're just in a physiological fog. And I had to force myself not to join them, because I knew we had a long day ahead of us to get out of there. So, and where do I learn to do that stuff? In the Navy, and we develop a dark humor. We laugh in the face of adversity. We never show stress or talk loudly when we're working through serious problems. And you learn that from living on a ship as well with a bunch of other roommates. So there's it's all in the book. So buy the book, but it's there's a lot of there's a lot in our story, and it's a success story.
Yeah, it certainly is. So
Scary,
we're running out of time,
successful.
gentlemen. Just to, Peter, perhaps some closing thoughts from you about QF72 or automation?
Closing thoughts. It was a success story, but it's a cautionary tale as well. I think we were well prepared as a crew by virtue of Kev and I, by both of our backgrounds. We both performed our roles, as did Ross, our second officer, as best we could, and it was good enough on the day. I think the cautionary part of the tale, though, is that automation is a great tool. It's amazing, and it frees up so much headspace to get on with other stuff that's going around while the aeroplane still flies accurately. Still needs monitoring, of course. But when it goes wrong, as I said earlier, it goes wrong spectacularly and instantaneously. So being engaged in the process, knowing where the aeroplane is at in terms of the whole operation all the time, being proactively engaged in the process of the piloting, even when it's being done automatically for you, under your direction, is so important. And my fear for the future batch of pilots is that growing up with automation only, they won't have the background necessarily to go, yeah, this is really important, that I'm paying attention right now, that I'm engaged from pushback to the door opening at the destination. It's really, really important. The on-the-ground stuff was important too. It was important to just keep plugging away at things. I'd completely forgotten about the dogs being on the tarmac. I was involved in that because, literally, I'd forgotten about it till right then. But there was a discussion about, we can't take the dogs out because it's a quarantine issue. We don't have quarantine clearance. And I'm going, yeah, but it's 30-something degrees in the hold. What are you going to do? Oh, just leave them there. I go, don't. Take the dogs out. Next thing they're underneath the aircraft. But the point is they need someone to stand up and go, do this or do that. And of course, there was no issue about it. But people are trying to superimpose rules on top of an emergency that just don't apply or need to be bent to get the job done. And I think both Kev and I and Ross and the cabin crew knew which rules were important on the ground and knew which rules we could bend a little to get the damn job done. And I felt the results were really good because of all that. How's that, Kev?
Yeah. Richard, perhaps you might have a couple of closing thoughts.
I just take my hat off to both our guests and their entire crew. It's just an amazing story, and I would just issue one final health warning. Once you start reading Kevin's book, you won't be able to put it down. So
Yes,
you need to be ready for a several-hour episode.
Yeah, look, it is, viewers, it is indeed a fabulous read. And thank you again, Kevin, and thank you very much, Peter, for joining us today. Viewers, a real special treat. Two amazing Top Guns who saved QF72, no question about it. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking us and sending us those great comments. And again, another shout out. There is a link below to Kevin's book, No Man's Land. I thoroughly recommend it. It is a great read. And we look forward to your company tomorrow. Thank you very much.